Listen closely, for I am about to tell you a story that has been passed down through 7 generations in the villages of my people. A story about a young man named Adebayo, whose arrogance cost him 3 days of agony, and whose suffering became the greatest lesson our people ever learned. This is not a story for the faint of heart. This is a story about respect, about consequences, and about the terrible price one pays for mocking what one does not understand. But before I tell you how Adebayo came to be cursed, before I tell you about the 3 days when his laughter became his prison, I must first tell you about the man he was before everything changed. Adebayo was 23 years old, and in all his life, he had never known failure. He was tall as a iroko tree, strong as a bull, and handsome enough that both men and women would pause their conversations just to watch him walk by. His father was the most successful merchant in their village. His mother came from a long line of powerful healers. His younger brothers and sisters looked up to him as if he were a god who had chosen to walk among mortals. In short, Adebayo believed the world existed to serve him. He believed that because he was beautiful and strong and came from a good family, nothing bad could ever touch him. He believed that the universe itself bent to accommodate his desires. This belief, as you will soon learn, was about to be shattered in the most terrible way imaginable. 2 months before our story truly begins, Adebayo's father had arranged a marriage for him. The bride's name was Folake, and she came from a neighboring village called Iluomi. By all accounts, Folake was beautiful, intelligent, and accomplished. The families had negotiated the bride price fairly. Everyone agreed it was a good match. Now, in our tradition, the bride and groom do not meet until the wedding ceremony. You wait. You trust your elders. You have faith that the arrangement will bring happiness. But Adebayo did not like to wait. Patience, he believed, was for people who were not important enough to get what they wanted immediately. So 3 weeks before the official meeting was scheduled, Adebayo decided to surprise his bride. He would arrive early, unannounced, and watch her face light up when she realized how fortunate she was to be marrying someone as magnificent as him. He told no one of his plan. He simply packed a small bag and began walking. It took him 2 full days to reach the boundary of Iluomi. The moment he crossed into that village, he should have known something was different. The air itself felt heavier, thicker, as if he were walking through water instead of wind. The smell of incense and burning herbs was so strong he could taste it on his tongue. The trees grew larger here, older, their trunks so wide that 5 men linking arms could not encircle them. Their branches twisted in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, as if the forest had been shaped by intention rather than chance. But it was the people that made Adebayo's confident stride slow to an uncertain shuffle. As he walked down the main path into the village center, he saw them. And he could not look away, though every instinct in his body screamed that he should. There was a woman drawing water from the well. Her arms extended past her knees. Not just long, but impossibly long, thin as reeds, moving with a grace that was both beautiful and deeply unsettling. There was an old man sitting in the shade of a hut. His teeth were so large they pushed his lips outward, massive and white as elephant tusks, yet he chewed his kola nut and chatted with his neighbors as if this were the most natural thing in the world. There was a priestess walking through the compound. Her ears hung down past her shoulders like heavy ornaments, swaying gently when she turned her head to greet someone. There was a young boy, no more than 12 years old, whose eyes were completely white. No pupils. No irises. Just pure white. Yet he navigated the compound with perfect ease, never bumping into a single person or pot, greeting people by name as if he could see them better than anyone with normal eyes. Adebayo's mouth fell open. His confident smile faded. His mind raced with questions that had no answers. What manner of place was this? What had happened to these people? Was it disease? Was it curse? Was it something in the water or the air? That was when Folake found him. She came around the corner of a hut and stopped dead when she saw him standing there, his face a mask of poorly concealed shock. She had been told about him, had heard descriptions from her father, and she recognized him immediately. The tall frame. The handsome face. The bearing of someone who had never been told no. But she also saw something else. She saw the way his eyes darted around the village, taking in the unusual features of her people. She saw the barely concealed horror in his expression. And she knew, in that moment, that she had very little time to prepare him before he made a terrible mistake. "You are not supposed to be here," she said, her voice urgent and low. "The official meeting is not for another week." "I wanted to surprise you," Adebayo said, trying to recover his confident smile. "I wanted to see you before all the formal ceremonies. I thought—" "Listen to me," Folake interrupted, her voice sharp as a blade. "My name is Folake. I am your betrothed. And I need you to understand something right now, this very moment, before you take another step into my village." She moved closer to him, her eyes searching his face. "In this village, we have elders who bear marks on their bodies. Some of these marks came from sacrifice. Some came from blessing. Some came from witnessing things that change a person forever. These marks are sacred. They are honored. And the first rule, the most important rule, the rule that cannot be broken under any circumstances, is this: we do not comment on them. We do not stare. We do not mock them. Ever. Do you understand?" Adebayo opened his mouth to respond, but Folake held up one hand. "I need you to promise me," she said. "Before we go any further, before you meet my family, before you spend another moment in this village, you must promise me that you understand this rule and that you will keep it. Not just for tonight. Not just for tomorrow. But for the rest of your life if we marry. Can you do that?" Looking into her intense eyes, seeing the genuine fear there, Adebayo found himself nodding. "Yes. Yes, I promise." But even as he said the words, a small nervous laugh escaped his lips. Just a chuckle, the kind that comes when the mind cannot quite grasp what it is seeing. Folake's expression hardened. "That laugh concerns me," she said quietly. "That laugh tells me you do not take this seriously." "I do," Adebayo said quickly. "I promise you, I understand." "We shall see," Folake said, and there was doubt heavy in her voice. "Come. Let us hope you prove worthy of the honor you have been given." That night, Adebayo sat with Folake's family in their compound. The feast was magnificent. Roasted goat. Pounded yam. Palm wine in polished calabashes. Fresh plantains. Fish stew that smelled like heaven. Everything prepared with obvious care and skill. Folake's father, whose voice rumbled like distant thunder, welcomed him warmly. Her mother pressed food into his hands with genuine affection. Her younger siblings watched him with curious, admiring eyes. Everything was normal. Everything was warm and welcoming. Folake sat close to him throughout the meal. Under the table, her hand found his knee. Not as affection, but as warning. A constant, gentle pressure reminding him to be careful, to watch himself, to remember his promise. Then the elders began to arrive. One by one, the oldest and most respected members of the village came to bless the upcoming union. And one by one, Adebayo found himself staring at features that his mind could not reconcile with reality. The man with teeth like tusks, who somehow ate and spoke with perfect ease, his whole face radiating kindness and wisdom. The woman with ears like pendants, who heard every whispered conversation in the compound even from across the room. The blind man with eyes white as chalk, who somehow walked through the crowded space without a single stumble, greeting each person by name as if he could see into their very souls. Under the table, Folake's grip on his knee grew tighter and tighter. And then her grandmother entered. The entire compound fell silent. Every conversation stopped. Everyone stood. And Adebayo's breath caught in his throat like a stone. Mama Kemi was a small woman, perhaps 70 or 80 years old, her back bent slightly with the weight of decades. She wore layers of cloth dyed the color of rust and sunset, and brass rings encircled her neck, catching the firelight like small suns. Her gray hair was wrapped in an elaborate headscarf of burgundy and gold. But her nose was impossible. It curved downward from her face like the trunk of an elephant, extending past her chin, nearly reaching her chest. It was not deformed or damaged. It was simply enormous, unnaturally long and curved, a feature so distinctive that it had to be the first thing anyone noticed about her. And yet she moved with such grace, such dignity, such power, that somehow her nose became not a deformity but a crown. She looked like royalty. She looked like a queen from the old stories, the ones about women who could speak to spirits and command the rain. "Welcome, young man," Mama Kemi said, her voice warm and rich as honey. She took his hand in both of hers, a greeting of genuine affection. "I have heard a great deal about you from my granddaughter and her father. I see now that their descriptions did not do you justice. I hope you will prove yourself worthy of the blessing of joining our family." Adebayo managed to stammer out a thank you. Under the table, Folake's nails drew blood from his knee. The rest of the meal passed in a haze. Adebayo kept his head down, kept his eyes on his food, kept his reactions to himself. But inside his mind, questions screamed and echoed and multiplied. That night, alone in the guest hut they had prepared for him, Adebayo lay awake staring at the thatched ceiling. He thought about calling off the marriage. He thought about making excuses and returning home. He thought about everything except what he should have been thinking about, which was this: perhaps his understanding of the world was much smaller than he believed it to be. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him and pulled him down into uneasy sleep. The next morning came too quickly. But by the time the sun was high in the sky, Adebayo had convinced himself that the worst was over. He had survived the night. He had survived the feast. He had kept his promise. He told himself he was a man of the world, sophisticated, capable of looking past surface differences. He told himself Folake was worth whatever strangeness this village held. And by mid-morning, he almost believed it. Folake came to collect him in the late morning. She seemed lighter somehow, relieved, as if she had been holding her breath the entire previous evening and could finally breathe again. "You did well," she told him as they walked toward the village edge, where he would begin his journey home before returning for the wedding ceremony next month. "I know it was strange for you. I know what you saw confused you. But you handled it with dignity and respect. I am proud of you." Something in those words made Adebayo stand taller. Made him feel like the confident, capable man he believed himself to be. His swagger returned. His smile came back. So what if her village had some unusual people? He is Adebayo. He was strong and handsome and destined for great things. He would make this work. That confidence lasted exactly 3 more minutes. They had almost reached the edge of the village, where the main path split into 2 directions. One path led back toward his home. The other led deeper into the forest, toward places where few people ventured. Standing at the exact point where the paths met, an old man leaned on a walking stick. At first glance, he looked like any elderly man bent with age and the weight of years. His shoulders curved forward. His posture showed the wear of 7 or 8 decades of living. He wore a faded gray tunic and brown trousers, both worn soft with age. His bare feet were gnarled, the toenails thick and yellowed. He held a carved wooden walking stick that bore ancestral symbols burned into its surface. He was facing away from them, toward the forest path. Adebayo and Folake were about to pass him with a polite greeting when something made Adebayo pause. The man's head was watching them. But his body was facing the forest. Adebayo's brain stuttered. His confident stride stopped completely. He stood frozen, trying to understand what his eyes were showing him. The man's face, his eyes, his nose, his mouth, was positioned where the back of his head should be. His body faced forward down the forest path. His shoulders oriented that direction. His feet pointed that way. But his face looked directly backward. Watching the path they had just come from. Watching them with ancient eyes that held the weight of countless years. The face was so completely reversed, so perfectly backward, that for a moment Adebayo thought it must be a trick of the light. A shadow playing games. An illusion created by exhaustion and stress. But no. The old man's backward face was absolutely real. His eyes, ancient and dark as forgotten wells, looked directly at Adebayo. His thin lips moved into something that might have been a smile or might have been a grimace. His backward-facing head tilted slightly, acknowledging their presence. And something in Adebayo's mind simply broke. The laugh started as a snort. Just a small expulsion of air from his nostrils. His brain's way of processing the impossible. But then, like a dam cracking under too much pressure, the laughter came. Full, violent, uncontrollable laughter. He doubled over, his free hand clutching his stomach, his whole body shaking with the force of it. Tears streamed down his face as he pointed at the old man with the backward face. His head. Adebayo gasped between fits of laughter. His face. How does he? Another wave of hilarity consumed him, so intense his sides ached, so intense his knees began to buckle. He had never seen anything so utterly absurd, so completely impossible, so magnificently ridiculous. How could anyone live like that? How could he see where he was going? How could he eat? How could he walk? How could he exist in the world with his head on backward? The laughter poured out of him like water from a broken calabash, violent and unstoppable and completely, utterly disrespectful. That was when Folake screamed. No, she screamed, a sound of absolute terror that cut through his laughter like a machete through grass. Adebayo, stop. Stop. She grabbed his arm and shook him violently, her beautiful face twisted with horror. Stop laughing. Stop it now. Do you understand what you are doing? But Adebayo could not stop. The laughter had taken on a life of its own, independent of his will, separate from his control. Each breath fed the next wave. Each wave brought fresh tears to his eyes and fresh gasps to his throat. He tried to speak, tried to apologize, but only laughter came out. I am sorry, he managed between guffaws. I cannot help it. The old man moved. Or rather, his body turned while his backward face remained fixed on Adebayo. His feet shuffled in the dust. His walking stick tapped the earth with the sound of a drum. His body rotated slowly, deliberately. And his backward face, those ancient eyes that had seen things that should never be seen, locked onto the young man with an intensity that should have frozen the laughter in his throat. Should have. But did not. When the old man spoke, his voice came not from his mouth alone but from the earth itself. It resonated through the ground beneath their feet. It vibrated in Adebayo's chest cavity. It was the voice of something far older than a single human life, far older than a single village, old as stone and bone and the dark places beneath the world where ancient things sleep. You laugh at me, child. The laughter faltered for just a moment. One blessed, quiet moment. In that moment, Adebayo opened his mouth to apologize, to explain that he meant no disrespect, that he simply could not control his reaction to something so strange and unexpected. In that moment, he might have been saved. But the laughter came rushing back, stronger than before. It rose from his belly like a black tide, pouring out of him, filling the space between him and the old man, filling his entire chest, his entire mind, drowning everything else. He laughed as Folake pulled on his arm, her nails drawing blood. He laughed as she screamed for help. He laughed as villagers began to emerge from nearby huts, their faces moving from confusion to horror as they realized what was happening. The old man, whose name was Papa Taiwo, and who had not cursed anyone in 30 years, raised one gnarled hand. His backward eyes, which had seen things that twisted reality itself, focused entirely on the young man who dared to mock him. Then laugh forever, stranger, Papa Taiwo said, and his words carried weight that seemed to bend the very light of the afternoon sun. Laugh until you understand that what you mock may be the only thing keeping darkness at bay. Laugh until you learn that every face tells a story you have not earned the right to judge. Laugh until understanding burns through your ignorance like fire through dry grass. He turned his backward face away, toward the forest, and began to walk. His body moved forward down the path. His backward face watched Adebayo even as he departed. For one moment, one final blessed moment, Adebayo's laughter stopped. The silence was so sudden, so complete, that he almost thought it was over. His breath heaved. His face was flushed red. His sides ached from the violence of it all. But the laughter had stopped. He opened his mouth to speak, to beg forgiveness, to say anything that might undo what he had done, but the laughter started again. And this time, it was different. This laughter was not joyful. This laughter was not the result of humor or surprise or his mind trying to process something strange. This laughter was torture. This laughter was drowning. This laughter was screaming wearing the mask of mirth. It tore from his throat like his body was being ripped apart from the inside. It was violent and alien and completely, utterly involuntary. This was laughter that had stopped belonging to him the moment Papa Taiwo spoke his curse. His body convulsed. His face twisted into shapes no human face should make. His mouth opened impossibly wide, wider than should have been possible, his jaw straining to accommodate the force of this supernatural sound that was no longer laughter at all but pure agony disguised as joy. Fulake screamed again, but this time not in warning. This time in grief. What happened in the next 72 hours became legend in both villages. It was whispered about. Warned about. Remembered as the moment when the boundaries between the human world and the spirit world grew dangerously thin. Adebayo was carried back to the village center by 4 strong men, his body thrashing with seizure-like convulsions, the laughter never stopping, never even pausing for breath. It was as if breath itself had become his enemy, as if the air entering his lungs existed only to fuel the next terrible wave of cursed mirth. His parents arrived that evening, summoned by urgent messengers who had run through the night to reach them. His mother wept until she had no more tears. His father stood in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what his proud, beautiful son had become. His younger siblings refused to look at him, unable to bear the sight of their confident brother reduced to a thrashing shell. The herbalists came first. They were the village healers, men and women who knew every plant, every root, every cure. They forced bitter potions down his throat, medicines that could cure poison and fever and possession. He laughed them back up, choking and retching but unable to stop the terrible sound even while choking. They tried again and again until they accepted that their herbs had no power here. The priests came next. They chanted protective prayers. They drew sacred symbols in the dust around his convulsing body. They called upon the ancestors to intervene, to show mercy, to release this young man from his torment. But his laughter drowned out their words. The wind scattered their ash and dust. Their prayers seemed to fall on deaf ears. They offered sacrifices. Chickens first, their blood poured onto the earth. Then goats, valuable goats that families could barely afford to lose. Then the finest yams, the best palm wine, everything they could think of that might appease whatever power had been offended. But still the laughter continued, relentless as the tide, unstoppable as time itself. By the second day, his lips had split from the strain. The skin tore at the corners of his mouth, and blood ran down his chin in thin red streams. His throat was so raw from the constant sound that each laugh resembled the tearing of cloth. His ribs began to crack. The healers could hear them snapping with each violent convulsion, like dry branches breaking underfoot. His eyes had rolled back so far into his head that only the whites showed, veined with red, bloodshot and terrible. Yet still his mouth laughed. Still his body jerked. Still his voice tore from him in that horrible, broken sound that was no longer human. The village could not sleep. The laughter echoed through every hut, every compound, every quiet corner where people tried to find rest. It seeped under doors and through walls. It invaded dreams and shattered any attempts at peace. Even the animals grew restless. The goats cried out in their pens. The chickens flew in frantic circles. The dogs howled as if answering a call from the world of spirits. By the third day, everyone understood. This was not a curse that normal healers could break. This was not something the village priests could fix with prayers and sacrifices. This was judgment from something old and powerful, something that had been insulted, something that had decided this young man needed to learn through suffering. On the third night, as the most desperate rituals were being prepared, rituals that might break the curse or might destroy the cursed man entirely, something unexpected happened. Mama Kemi, despite her advanced age and the danger of what she was attempting, took her walking stick, wrapped her headscarf tight, and disappeared into the forest alone. The villagers did not try to stop her. They knew where she was going. They knew that if anyone had the standing, the age, the wisdom, and the respect to speak with Papa Taiwo in his place between the human world and the world of spirits, it would be Mama Kemi. The forest at night is not like the forest during the day. It is a different world entirely. It is a place where the rules that govern sunlight do not quite apply. Where shadows have depth and weight and substance. Where the darkness itself seems to listen and watch and remember. Where very old things observe from the spaces between trees, things that have no names in the language of men. Mama Kemi walked the narrow path to Papa Taiwo's dwelling with the confidence of someone who had walked this path many times before, perhaps over many years, perhaps over decades. She knew where the roots would catch unwary feet. She knew which vines hung low and which high. She knew when to pause and let her old eyes adjust to the deeper darkness that existed beneath the canopy. She found him sitting outside his small hut, his backward face watching the direction from which she had come, his body facing the forest beyond. The fire burning in the pit before him was small and smokeless, burning with a kind of supernatural steadiness that suggested it had been burning for a very long time, perhaps longer than any natural fire could burn. Mama Kemi, Papa Taiwo greeted her, his ancient voice warm with recognition. "You have come to beg for the foolish boy." She lowered herself carefully onto the ground before him, kneeling despite the protest of her old joints, her enormous curved nose nearly touching the earth as she bent in a gesture of deep respect. "I have," she said, her voice steady despite her age. "But not because he deserves mercy, Papa Taiwo. I have come because we all bear the weight of what makes us different. We all carry marks that the ignorant might mock if they do not understand their meaning." Papa Taiwo's backward face remained silent, watching her with those eyes that had seen too much. "I know why your head turned," Mama Kemi continued, and her voice held the weight of knowledge earned through decades of connection to this village and its secrets. "I was there 40 years ago. I remember. When the darkness came for our village. When it rose up from the deep places where darkness sleeps and hungers. You were there too. You ran with the rest of us toward safety, toward light, toward the protection of community and fire and prayer. But you kept looking back. You could not look away. You could not stop watching. You saw what no one else dared to face. You saw the true form of that darkness, the shape of it, the reality of it that would drive most men mad. And you looked at it so hard, so completely, that your body forgot to turn with your eyes. Your soul froze in that moment of witnessing, and your head turned with the weight of what you had seen, but your body kept running forward, kept moving toward survival, kept carrying you to safety even as your spirit remained locked in that terrible moment of seeing. She paused, and her voice trembled slightly with emotion. You saved us that night, Papa Taiwo. You watched the darkness so the rest of us could run without looking back. You bore the weight of that vision so we would not have to. You are still watching it, are you not? That is why you live at the boundary between the village and the wild places. That is why you face two directions at once. You are still guarding us. Still keeping watch. Still bearing witness so that we do not have to. For a long moment, Papa Taiwo said nothing. The small fire crackled softly. Insects sang their night song in the forest around them. Somewhere in the distance, something large moved through the undergrowth. He laughed at me, Papa Taiwo said finally, and in his ancient voice there was pain. Deep, old, never fully healed pain. He laughed as if my burden was comedy. As if the price I paid to protect my village, to save my people, was nothing more than a joke for his entertainment. He is ignorant, Mama Kemi said gently. He does not know that my nose grew long from sniffing out danger year after year, from smelling poison in the air and sickness in the water before it could harm my family and my people. He does not understand that Elder Bode's arms stretched from reaching into the spirit river again and again to pull out drowning children whose time had not yet come. That Elder Funmi's teeth grew large from grinding medicines through plagues that would have killed us all. That Elder Ogun's eyes turned white from staring at the sun for days at a time to predict droughts and save crops, to keep us from starvation. She waited, letting her words sink into the night air. We all have our reasons for looking the way we do, she continued softly. These appearances are not curses, Papa Taiwo. They are testimonies. They are stories written in flesh and bone. They are proof of the prices we have paid, the sacrifices we have made, to protect those we love. Every unusual feature, every strange mark, every difference that makes ignorant people stare, these are our badges of honor. These are the scars we bear from battles fought in the name of our people. Ignorance does not excuse cruelty, Papa Taiwo said, his backward eyes reflecting the firelight. No, Mama Kemi agreed. It does not. But wisdom can transform cruelty into understanding. You can destroy him, Papa Taiwo, and he becomes just another body in the earth, forgotten within a generation. Or you can teach him, and he becomes a living reminder, a walking lesson, a bridge between mockery and understanding for all who meet him. He will carry shame for the rest of his life. Every time he laughs, truly laughs with joy, he will feel the ghost of this curse brush against his throat like a warning. He will remember the cost of mockery. He will remember that laughter without empathy is just another form of violence. And he will teach others what you have taught him. Is that not a more powerful legacy than simply ending his life? Papa Taiwo closed his ancient eyes. All of them. The ones that looked forward with his body facing backward, and the ones that saw beyond sight, beyond time, into the places where past and future meet. When he opened them again, something had shifted in their depths. He may live, Papa Taiwo said finally. But he will remember. This will not be mercy, Mama Kemi. This will be education. And the lesson will be written not just in his memory but in his flesh, in his voice, in his very being. Let that suffice. That night, as Mama Kemi made her way back through the forest, as her silhouette disappeared into the darkness between the trees, the laughter stopped. Not gradually. Not fading away like a dying fire. Completely and suddenly, as if someone had severed a string that held it in place. One moment, the terrible sound filled the compound. The next moment, silence. Perfect, absolute silence. For a brief, terrifying moment, everyone thought Adebayo had died. His body lay absolutely still on the woven mats in the center of the compound. His chest was not moving. His eyes were closed. His lips, split and bloody, were finally, blessedly quiet. For hours, no one dared approach him. They stood in a circle around his still form, watching, waiting, afraid that any touch might shatter whatever fragile balance had been reached. Afraid that he might be balanced on the very edge between life and death, and any disturbance might push him over. Folake sat at his side, not touching him but watching his face intently, watching for any sign of breathing, any sign of life, any sign that the man she was supposed to marry was still in there somewhere, fighting to return. Dawn came slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold and orange. As the first rays of sunlight touched Adebayo's face, he drew a breath. A single, shuddering, rattling breath that sounded like it hurt to take. His eyes opened. They were different now. Older. Haunted. carrying a weight they had not held 3 days before. He stared upward at nothing for a long moment, his breathing slow and labored, each breath seeming to cost him great effort. When his gaze finally found Folake, when his eyes finally focused on her face, there was recognition there. But also something else. Understanding. Shame. The crushing weight of comprehension. He tried to speak, but his voice was gone. Destroyed. Shattered beyond repair. It took weeks for his body to heal enough that he could move without assistance. It took months for his throat to heal enough that he could speak. When he finally did speak again, his voice was different. Rougher, deeper, permanently altered by the curse. It would sound strange for the rest of his life, a constant reminder of what had happened, of the price he had paid for 3 minutes of mockery. But more than his body had changed. Before Adebayo left Iluomi to return home and complete his recovery, he asked Folake to take him to see Papa Taiwo one final time. Folake was hesitant, afraid that seeing the old man again might trigger something, might break what little recovery he had managed. But Adebayo was insistent. He needed to understand. He needed to apologize properly. He needed to know the story behind the backward face. They found Papa Taiwo at the same crossroads where the curse had been cast. He stood in the late afternoon light, his backward face watching the forest path, his body facing toward the depths of the wild places. When he heard them approach, his backward eyes shifted to acknowledge them, but his body did not turn. Adebayo stood before the old man, leaning heavily on a walking stick for support, his body still weak, his lips still bearing the thin white scars that would mark him forever. When he spoke, his new rough voice was almost unrecognizable, so different from the confident, smooth voice he had possessed just weeks before. Why? The single word carried multitudes of questions. Why had Papa Taiwo cursed him? Why did he live like this? Why was his head backward? Why had he chosen not to destroy Adebayo entirely when he had the power to do so? Papa Taiwo regarded him with those ancient, watching eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades, the burden of terrible knowledge. Because 40 years ago, I looked back when everyone else ran forward. The darkness hunted our village. Hunted us like we were prey, like we were nothing more than meat for its hunger. And something made me turn around, made me look at what was chasing us. I saw its true form, boy. I saw what it really was, beneath the shadows and the terror. And my soul froze in that moment of witnessing. I could not look away. I could not unsee what I had seen. My body kept running. Kept moving toward safety. Kept walking forward toward the light and the fire and the protection of the village. But my head turned with the weight of what I had seen, turned to keep watching that darkness, to keep my eyes on it so it could not surprise us, so it could not catch us unaware. And my head never turned back. I live here at the boundary between the human world and the wild places, between safety and danger, between what can be seen and what can only be witnessed. Someone has to watch the darkness, boy. Someone has to keep vigil so that people like you can sleep safe at night, so children can play without fear, so families can gather around fires and tell stories without worrying about what lurks beyond the light. Someone has to look at what is terrible and wrong and dangerous, and bear the weight of seeing it. That is my burden. That is my sacrifice. That is why I look the way I do. You mocked that. You mocked sacrifice. You mocked the price that some of us pay to protect those we love. Tears filled Adebayo's eyes and spilled down his cheeks. I am so sorry, he whispered, his rough new voice breaking. I did not understand. I did not know. If I could take it back. Sorry is a start, Papa Taiwo interrupted, not unkindly. But understanding is the destination. We all carry our stories on our bodies, boy, we all carry our stories on our bodies, boy. Some wear them in scars. Some in strangeness. Some in ways that make people stare and whisper and wonder. Learn to read those stories with respect, not laughter. Learn to ask, what happened to you, instead of, what is wrong with you? Learn to see that different is not defective. That unusual is not ugly. That the marks on our bodies might be proof not of curse, but of strength. Not of weakness, but of survival. Adebayo nodded, tears still streaming down his face, unable to speak through the emotion choking his throat. Good, Papa Taiwo said. Then perhaps my curse was not cruelty, but teaching. The hardest lessons leave the deepest marks. Go now. Live well. And remember. Adebayo's recovery took 6 full months. In that time, his entire understanding of the world shifted and transformed. The proud, confident young man who had arrived in Iluomi was gone, burned away by cursed laughter, destroyed by consequence, replaced by someone quieter, deeper, humbler. Someone who had learned to see beyond surfaces. Someone who understood that the world was far larger and far more complex than his arrogance had allowed him to imagine. When he could finally speak clearly again, when his rough voice had strengthened enough to be understood, he began to tell his story. He spoke at gatherings in both villages. He spoke to children who needed to learn respect for difference. He spoke to young men who reminded him of who he used to be, arrogant and beautiful and convinced of their own importance. He spoke to anyone who would listen, not to entertain them, but to educate them. Not to make them laugh, but to make them understand. He became known throughout the region as a man of deep empathy. Someone who looked beyond surfaces and saw the person beneath. Someone who understood that every person carried a story worth knowing, worth respecting, worth honoring. He and Folake married in a ceremony that brought together elders from both villages. It was a union blessed not just by their families, but by the entire community who had witnessed Adebayo's transformation. Mama Kemi, with her enormous curved nose held high with pride, blessed their union with tears of joy running down her weathered cheeks. Papa Taiwo attended as well, standing at the edge of the gathering, his backward face watching from the shadows. And Adebayo felt, just for a moment, something that might have been approval radiating from the old guardian. Years passed like water flowing in a river. Adebayo and Folake had 3 children. 2 daughters and a son. They raised them in both villages, moving between the 2 communities, teaching their children from infancy to look past surfaces, to honor the stories written in other people's flesh, to see that difference was not defect but diversity, not curse but blessing. They taught their children that their father's rough voice and scarred lips were reminders of a lesson learned the hardest way possible. They taught them that respect was not something earned through beauty or strength or arrogance, but through understanding and compassion and the willingness to see beyond one's own limited perspective. More years passed. Seasons turned. Children grew into adults. Adebayo, now a man in his middle years with gray touching his temples and lines marking his face, sat beneath an ancient irako tree and told his story to a new generation. His children sat at his feet, grown now with children of their own. Behind them stood their children, his grandchildren, wide-eyed and attentive. Beyond them stood villagers from both communities who had come to hear the tale that had become legend. Every face tells a story, Adebayo told them, his rough voice carrying across the compound with the authority of experience and suffering. Not all stories are pleasant. Not all stories are easy to read. Some are written in scars. Some are written in strangeness. Some are written in features that do not match what you think a person should look like. But they are all worth understanding. They are all worth respecting. And if you take nothing else from my life, from my suffering, from my transformation, take this: the moment you laugh at someone without understanding their story, you cross a line. And that line might have consequences far deeper than you can imagine. Consequences that will mark you forever. Consequences that will change not just your body, but your very soul. His eldest daughter, a woman now in her 20s with his eyes and Folake's grace and wisdom, squeezed his shoulder gently. She understood. They all understood. Because they had grown up knowing that their father's curse had transformed into their family's greatest gift. A lifetime of teaching. A legacy of compassion. A bridge between understanding and mockery that helped entire communities learn to see each other differently. Decades later, long after Adebayo had passed from this world in his sleep at a good old age, long after Folake had followed him into the ancestral realm, the story lived on. It was told around fires in Adebayo's village. It was told in Iluomi, where his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren still walked the streets with pride. It was whispered by mothers to children who needed to learn respect before their own arrogance got them into trouble. It was recited by elders as a cautionary tale against the cruelty of unchecked pride. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind moved just right through the trees, people swore they could hear it. The faintest echo of cursed laughter carried on the breeze. Not as a haunting, but as a reminder. Not as punishment, but as teaching. Papa Taiwo lived to an extraordinarily old age, his backward face watching generation after generation grow up learning to respect the stories written on the bodies of those they encountered. Before he finally passed into the world of ancestors, he took Adebayo's eldest son aside and told him something that would become the most sacred part of the family's oral tradition, words that would be passed down through every generation that followed. Your father learned what takes most people a lifetime to understand, the old man said, his backward eyes seeing into depths others could not fathom. He learned that mockery is a form of blindness. That respect is the price of sight. That the world is far stranger and far more wonderful than any single person's understanding of it can contain. Tell your children. Tell their children. Tell them until the end of time, before you laugh at someone, understand their story. Before you judge someone's appearance, ask yourself what sacrifice, what curse, what battle they might have survived to look the way they do. Every scar tells a story of survival. Every unusual feature tells a story of sacrifice. And the world is a better place when we read those stories with respect instead of mockery. In the years that followed, something remarkable happened throughout the region. The village of Iluomi, which had been so isolated for so long, so strange and mysterious to outsiders, began to be known not as a place of curse and mystery, but as a place of wisdom and teaching. People from neighboring villages began to send their children there to learn. Not just the practical skills of farming and healing and weaving, but the deeper lessons about respect and empathy and seeing beyond surfaces. The elders of Iluomi, each bearing their distinctive marks, became teachers and healers and spiritual guides sought out by people from many days' journey away. Mama Kemi's descendants became famous for their ability to detect danger and sickness before it struck. Elder Bode's children inherited his gift for rescue and protection. Elder Funmi's family continued the tradition of medicine-making that had saved countless lives. And Adebayo's descendants, carrying within them the wisdom earned through his suffering, became bridges between communities. They told his story not as a tale of horror or punishment, but as teaching about transformation and redemption. They showed that curse and blessing were sometimes the same thing, just seen from different angles, understood from different perspectives. The thin white scars on Adebayo's lips, visible in every memory carried by those who had known him, became iconic throughout the region. They became the symbol of the lesson, visible and permanent and honest. They were proof that understanding could come through suffering. That respect could be learned even at great cost. That the world was larger and stranger and more wonderful than any arrogant young man could imagine. And so the story passed down through generations, traveling from village to village, from family to family, changing slightly in each telling but keeping its core truth intact. It was not a warning to fear Papa Taiwo or the supernatural powers of the old ones. It was an invitation to see differently. An invitation to look at the people around you and ask, what have they survived? What battles have shaped them? What marks on their bodies tell stories I have not learned to read yet? Because in the end, that was the true curse and the true blessing wrapped together as one. The knowledge that the world was far too large and far too complex for mockery. That every person you encountered carried stories you had not earned the right to judge. That respect was not weakness but sight. That understanding was not acceptance of wrongness but recognition of rightness. The rightness of each person's unique path. Each person's unique mark. Each person's unique story. Years later, when travelers and scholars came to study the villages and try to understand the unusual features of some of the elders, they found no evidence of disease or genetic disorder. They found no scientific explanation for the marks these people bore. Some theorized that the stories were exaggerated over time, that normal features had been blown out of proportion by generations of retelling. Some suggested it was all magical thinking, the result of isolated communities creating mythology to explain what they did not understand. Some simply declared it impossible and moved on to other studies. But those who truly understood, those who had listened to Adebayo's descendants with open hearts and minds, those who had sat at fires and heard the story told with reverence and care, they knew the truth. The story of the laughing curse was not really about the supernatural, though the supernatural was real and present within it. It was about something far more powerful and far more dangerous than any spirit or curse. It was about the human tendency to mock what we do not understand. The human arrogance that assumes our way of seeing is the only way of seeing, the only valid perspective. The human cruelty that can flow so easily from laughter, from dismissal, from the refusal to see another person's humanity. And it was about something equally powerful and equally important. The possibility of transformation. The possibility that a moment of terrible consequence could become a lifetime of learning and teaching. The possibility that curse and blessing were sometimes two names for the same thing, two sides of the same coin. The possibility that a young man's worst moment, his deepest shame, could become the foundation of his greatest legacy. Every culture has stories like this. Every village, every family, every community holds tales that are told again and again because they touch something true and eternal in human nature. They are not just entertainment. They are not just stories to pass the time. They are teaching. They are warning. They are invitation. They are mirrors held up to show us ourselves, our flaws, our potential for both cruelty and compassion. The story of Adebayo and Papa Taiwo was such a story. It was the story of mockery meeting consequence. Of arrogance colliding with mystery. Of suffering becoming wisdom. Of curse transforming into blessing through the difficult, painful alchemy of understanding. And it was a story that demanded to be told, again and again, to every generation, because the lesson it taught was one that every generation needed to learn anew. Before you laugh, understand the story. Before you judge, ask questions. Before you mock, remember that everyone you encounter is carrying marks of battles you know nothing about. Scars from wars you did not fight. Wisdom from suffering you have not experienced. Stories written in their flesh that you have not earned the right to dismiss with laughter. Because that is what it means to be truly human. Not to be free from difference, but to learn to read difference with respect and curiosity. Not to be free from suffering, but to transform suffering into wisdom that can help others. Not to be free from mistakes, but to learn from mistakes and become better, kinder, wiser because of them. The old ones remember everything. Their faces tell stories of sacrifice and survival. Their bodies bear the marks of prices paid to protect those they loved. And their mercy, when it comes, is never free. It must be earned with understanding. It must be honored with respect. And it must be passed down through generations so that others can learn without having to pay the same terrible price. Mock what you do not understand, and you might laugh forever, trapped in your own ignorance and cruelty. Learn to see the story behind every face, and you might finally understand what it means to be human. To be part of a community. To be connected to something larger than yourself. In the quiet moments, late at night when the fires burn low and the stars shine bright above, you can still hear them if you listen carefully. Not the cursed laughter anymore. That has been silenced long ago, released when understanding replaced ignorance. But something else. Something softer and more profound. The echo of an old man with a backward face, standing at the crossroads between worlds, watching the darkness so others can sleep safe and unafraid. The echo of a woman with a long curved nose, sniffing out danger before it can strike, protecting her family and her people through sacrifice. The echo of all the marked ones, all the different ones, all the ones who paid prices others cannot imagine to protect those they loved. And the echo of a young man who laughed at what he did not understand, and paid a price so terrible it became his salvation, his redemption, his greatest gift to the world. Their voices blend together, carried on the wind that moves through the trees. Not as warning alone. Not as curse or threat. But as invitation. To see. To understand. To respect. To honor. To remember that every face tells a story. That every story deserves to be heard before it is judged. That every person you meet is carrying burdens and blessings you know nothing about. And that the distance between mockery and understanding, between cruelty and compassion, between ignorance and wisdom, is sometimes just 3 days of cursed laughter. 3 days that can change not just one life, but generations of lives that follow. 3 days that can transform curse into blessing, suffering into teaching, shame into honor. This is the story of Adebayo. This is the story of Papa Taiwo. This is the story of the laughing curse. Remember it well. Tell it to your children. Let it shape how you see the world and everyone in it. For it is not just a story from the past. It is a lesson for right now, this moment, today. Every time you see someone who looks different, who moves differently, who speaks differently, who bears marks you do not understand. Every time you feel laughter rising in your throat at someone else's expense. Every time you are tempted to mock what you do not comprehend. Remember Adebayo. Remember his 3 days of agony. Remember how his curse became his blessing. Remember that every face tells a story. And choose understanding over mockery. Choose respect over laughter. Choose compassion over cruelty. That is the lesson. That is the gift. That is what the ancestors want you to know. The laughing curse was real. Its consequences were terrible. But its teaching was beautiful. And that teaching echoes still, generation after generation, reminding us all to see each other not as objects of mockery, but as people with stories worth knowing, worth honoring, worth respecting. This is the end of the story. But it is not the end of the lesson. The lesson lives on in every person who hears it and takes it to heart. In every child who learns to see beyond surfaces. In every community that values understanding over judgment. The lesson lives on in you, if you will carry it forward. Remember the laughing curse. Remember Adebayo. Remember Papa Taiwo. Remember that every face tells a story. And may you always choose to read those stories with respect.